Coming up on today's episode.
We both knew that chance meeting when he was 9 had absolutely changed lives. What we do is to help people to help themselves, and that seems to me the key of making success.
Yeah.
The violence absolutely haunts me. It's just beyond belief.
Welcome to The Changemakers, a podcast shining a light on the people who dedicate their careers to changing the lives of others. I'm Lydia Parkin.
And I'm Claire Edwards.
We're both former journalists who now work in the third sector.
In this podcast, we will talk to society's fixers, menders, mopper-uppers and fighters about why they do their job, what they see in their work and why it matters. This is a commentary on our world and the often unsung heroes within it, who can only do their work because members of the public choose to support them through donations or fundraising activity.
To them, their job may just be that, their job. But to us, it's remarkable what they do and achieve every day. Their stories deserve to be heard.
Patricia Parker OBE was approaching a stage in her life where she hoped she could finally use her studio for the purpose for which it was intended, being creative. Instead, a trip to see her son, who was working in Sudan, quickly turned into her next mission to make things better for others. More than 2 decades later, her studio remains the office where she runs Kids for Kids, a charity dedicated to transforming the lives of children and their families in what they call the forgotten Darfur, an area of the country which faces tremendous hardship and is blighted by the horrors of war and genocide. It's a part of the world which receives little press in this country, so prepare to learn lots and be inspired by a woman who is relentless in her quest to make lasting change. Child by child, goat by goat. Over to this week's Changemaker. We'd like to start with where it all began with you. So I don't know how much of your journey you'd like to tell us, but we'd really love to know your backstory and what led you into the role you're in now.
Well, I was actually being rather, if you like, selfish. I've always done charity stuff, but in fact, I was cutting back because I really wanted to paint. And I don't know if you can see on the video now, but there were, this was the studio, except it never became a studio. It turned out I was, if you like, the right person in the right place in terms of being able to help. And what happened was my son was in his first proper job in the Foreign Office abroad, a full-time appointment abroad. He was the political secretary in Khartoum in Sudan. It was his birthday. It was this time of year. And I went over to Sudan, thinking that I would try and paint and do him a birthday party. But at the birthday party, so we're literally, the timing is right, 27th of September, I threw a party for him on the roof of his house in Khartoum, and we invited the then head of Save the Children in Khartoum. And because I've always done stuff for children, I said I'd like to see how children were living the next time I came out, because it was obvious that even in Khartoum, the capital, that there was huge poverty.
So can you tell us about your first visit to Darfur? What is their reality? If you could describe your first visit and kind of what struck you most.
So I went out in March of 2001, and Alistair and Robert had cooked up this trip to go to Darfur to show us around. And Alistair hadn't been to Darfur, so we were tourists, if you like. Now, it was March, and it was absolutely shocking. It was so hot. There was already a drought in Darfur. And as we left the regional capital, which is called El Fasher in North Darfur, we actually, there were no roads. There's only a couple, or then there were only a couple of tarmac roads in El Fasher. Really, really, really primitive. It was a town. It was a huddle of huts. And we set out north across what was basically desert, scrub desert. And there were literally footprints in the sand from people walking or on donkeys, no other transport, and no roads. So we bounced across the sand, and we were 90 miles north of the regional capital. and came across this, to me, shocking sight in the middle of this blistering heat. A little 9-year-old with a great big jerry can, a big, I mean, they when they're full, they weigh 25 kilos. And he was struggling with this jerry can in the middle of nowhere under blistering heat. And we bounced across the sand to say, are you lost? And I mean, it's flat. Imagine flat as far as the eye can see, just scrub. And very shocking. We said, are you lost? And he said, no, he wasn't lost. He had just been to collect water. We looked and we said, well, how far are you walking? I mean, we couldn't see anything. And he said, well, he didn't know how far it was, but it took him 7 hours to reach the hand pump. He said, a 9-year-old, what? And that seemed to be acceptable. And so I said, well, sort of describe your route. So he described his route, and yes, it was a walk of 7 hours to reach the hand pump. And obviously it would take him longer to walk back. And I was frankly shocked because we were only in March, which is basically the spring of the year. And I actually thought, how could a 9-year-old survive the heat of summer if he had to do that across the rest of the year? So I still feel it was rather arrogant. I said I wanted to see his mother. So we went to find his mother, and she was camping in a dried riverbed, a wadi. And so she had taken 3 precious possessions with her, and of course the children, which were 3 little goats. And we turn up in our big 4x4, and she offers us the only thing that she has, which is a bowl of goat's milk. And that's their evening meal. And suddenly I realized that not only, obviously, should we somehow try and provide a hand pump in their village, but actually 3 goats was obviously not enough to keep, there were 5 children, to keep 5 children and the mother alive. The poor father had gone for allegedly work. I mean, basically, he had removed himself because he was another mouth to feed. And so it was obvious to me that, my goodness, we needed to dig a hand. Incidentally, saying to provide a hand pump, under Darfur, there's the biggest aquifer in Africa, actually under Darfur. So if only you can afford to drill a hand pump, the water is there. This is what is so shocking to me. And so it seemed to me, well, literally within that first day even, I was thinking hand pump and goats, we need more goats.
How did you work out what you were going to do to help, or what exactly could help?
We went to the village and we sat with particularly the women and the children, and asked them about their lives. And actually, it was the best thing we could possibly do, because one of the things about Darfurians, they won't ask you for anything. So what I always do is to say, tell me about your life. Tell me how you're living now, and then, you hear these problems and then you say, well, would this help? That help? Could we do this? And one of the things they said, for example, I said, what's the thing that most worries you in the village? And they said, that the young girls said, oh, childbirth, getting married, childbirth. And I said, well, why is that? Healthcare, whatever. And they said, well, no, there's no healthcare in villages, in any village. But we are lucky in our village. They always want to tell you good news. We are lucky in our village that we have a traditional birth attender. And I said, oh, what's that? And they said, oh, a traditional birth attender is an older lady who has survived childbirth. And, hopefully you can give birth naturally in the village. But if there's obstructed labor, which of course is frequent because of FGM, then they use, you'll love this, rope delivery. Don't think too much about that exactly. I mean, it's beyond shocking. Incidentally, after they've given birth, they get themselves sewn up again. And it's even more dangerous the second time because, of course, they could have adhesions and so on. It's pretty awful. And I actually obviously thought, my goodness, I'm sure we could train midwives. Now, I had started a charity called Hospice Home Care back in the 80s. So I knew about burnout. And so it was very important on many levels to make sure there were 2 midwives who could back each other up, support each other, back each other up. And also, of course, cover for each other. You know, at that stage, there weren't even mobile phones. So it's not as if they could have rung a hospital or rung for advice from someone. You know, they were on their own. I mean, a very scary thing to do. And so you can see that already within that first trip, there were things that it seemed to me it was absolutely obvious that had to be provided. And then again, it seemed very obvious to me. Here was I living in Dorking. Darfur is quite a long way from Dorking. I wasn't going to be there to run the projects. So again, it seemed to me that we had to make sure that the village took ownership of whatever it was we provided. So although we've spent actually several million now on projects in Darfur, we don't own anything. But we only adopt a village and provide the whole package of projects. There's a lot more we do as well as the things I've mentioned. All things that the village has shown us this would make a difference to my life.
So it's really led by them that are there rather than deciding what they need.
Absolutely, absolutely. And all of them, you know, even the youngest child, there's no real childhood for children. You've gathered a 9-year-old is treated, frankly, like doing a man's job. I've never seen a toy in a village. There were no toys. I've seen a little, I think it's probably about a 2-year-old, actually making bricks. I mean, he was enjoying it, but he was making bricks. And they were going to be dried in the sun and used. You know, life is very, very tough. It is to survive. So you can see that right from the start, we had a sort of package. And it was obvious that what we had to do was to get the buy-in of the whole village and then train volunteers chosen by the whole community very democratically to run the projects. And actually, from that first visit, we virtually devised the whole of what we do for Kids now. We've added extra things, but that is basically the principle. I actually don't believe in charity. Of course, we're a registered charity, but I don't believe in charity. I think it's demeaning. What we do is to help people to help themselves, and that seems to me the key of making success.
Yeah. So the kids in your name, Kids for Kids, are the goats, aren't they? Could you just tell us a little bit more about how that element of the scheme works?
As I say, I don't believe in charity. So we lend 5 goats to the poorest families selected democratically by the villages. And these are people who are absolutely living, you can't believe they'd live on so little. And when a mother has 5 goats, immediately her children have milk. That is absolutely transformative for their health. And as the little flock grows, the mother is able to start selling excess milk, to sell yogurt. And suddenly she has money of her own that she can choose herself how she spends it. And I mean, one of the things I love, after 2 years, they have to pass on 5 offspring, 5 healthy nanny goats to another poorest family. But then she will have a little flock of goats herself. And almost invariably, the mother will choose to sell some of her goats to buy a donkey cart for her husband, because that will give her husband a supplementary income. And that is transformative in her life. I mean, it's absolutely wonderful.
And you've painted such a vivid and shocking picture there. And how did you go about setting up Kids for Kids? So you kind of had this visit, you've come home, you've got these ideas kind of spinning in your mind, you've seen the need. Where did you go from there to make it a reality?
So, you know, when I first went there, not only did I have a space where I could work from, which was the studio that never was a studio. You know, 23 years, it's still not a studio. But my job had been public relations, so I knew how to publicize a charity, to call for help, to get support, and because nobody had heard of Darfur. And on top of that, I had started this other charity back in the 80s. So I knew how to start a charity. Between you and me, I also would have said, I knew more than enough to say, don't don't start another one, for goodness sake. I should have known better, but, you know, these things. And so, you know, I mean, it's hard to believe, but think of that little 9-year-old. Because of him, there are now 110 Kids for Kids villages. And before now, when people are flocking to our villages, I was told it was 590,000 people that we already had, you know, affected their lives.
Wow.
And there's terrible conflict happening in Sudan at the moment, isn't there? Can you tell us a little bit about what's happening in Darfur specifically?
Since April, the most appalling violence has absolutely overrun the whole of Sudan, and particularly in Darfur. And it's reverted again to genocide. It's absolutely appalling. The violence is absolutely shocking. Ordinary life has more or less collapsed. The banks have closed. The markets are struggling, you know, they hardly open. And remember, people survive on what they can grow. And last year, we knew was a disaster from the harvest point of view and so on. There were pests, there was, you know, horrendous problems. We knew that we would start this year needing to provide some emergency aid. Now, we don't normally, that's not our priority, emergency aid, but sometimes, of course, it has to be. And we were just getting cracking with that. And then there was this appalling coup by the military, who arrested the transitional civilian government and took over. And then the two leaders of that military government they set up for themselves started fighting each other. And unfortunately, the Rapid Support Force, one side, is made up of the Janjaweed. I'm sure you heard about those, the devils on horseback, who attacked villages. It started in 2003. And I mean, there are still hundreds of thousands of people who've had their homes destroyed, taken over. They've been driven out, you know, massacres and so on. Women at great risk, women and children. And now that's happening again. The genocide is happening in Darfur.
What impact is that having on your villages?
What is absolutely extraordinary is that people are flocking to our villages because, for example, there are midwives there. The healthcare has collapsed. And so having a midwife in a village, I mean, Lydia, can you imagine having to be at home with your husband and no healthcare and just a friend coming in from you know, another hut? I mean, you know, having midwives in our villages is just that alone. And then, of course, we have our hand pumps that are close, so the walk for water isn't you know, as vulnerable, as women and children aren't as vulnerable as they would be otherwise. And of course, the goats are providing protein and minerals and vitamins through the goat's milk. So our sustainable projects now are even more important than they've ever been. And I find that, well, I just don't understand how that happens. So, of course, the tragedy is there are hundreds of villages still where conditions are even worse than in any of ours, you know. And don't think that we're talking about ordinary levels of life that you and I would accept. Even in our villages, you're talking about really basic living. You know, people live in huts made of straw. I mean, you as mothers, you would be thinking, as I do, about, you know, the wolf and I'll blow your hut down. Darfur is flat. The wind howls across, and it howls through the straw walls. I mean, I've never had a mouthful of food in Darfur that isn't full of sand. You know, that awful feeling of scrunching your teeth as we're in.
How do you handle being so far away from the cause, particularly when things are as difficult as they are now? And could we start with how it affects you emotionally and then how you practically handle it, please?
Actually, Claire, there were two answers to that. First of all, the violence absolutely haunts me. It's just beyond belief to think that people can be so careless of lives. I just cannot understand cruelty. I just cannot understand it. And I have to say, it gives me many sleepless nights. I mean, well, virtually all sleepless nights. Look at how tired I look. It's so I find that very difficult, extremely difficult. Second thing is that, of course, I'm incredibly worried about all the people we know. You cannot but love people in Darfur who will, as volunteers, support their own people. They are poor. They need everything they can get themselves, and yet they do it for love of their own people. So emotionally, it's extremely difficult. In terms of practical, people have had to flee. Our trustee, for example, our Sudanese trustee, he was in his home in Khartoum, a lovely house with his family. You know, the sort of houses we live in. And his daughter was going. The fighting had just started. Nobody quite knew what was happening, and his daughter was going up the stairs, and a stray bullet went through the window. And as she went up the stairs, the bullet went through between her legs and hit the stairs. I mean, can you imagine?
No.
Now, of course, all that Khalid could do was to get his family out of Khartoum and go to Cairo. So he is now in Port Sudan. Everybody who can leave has left Khartoum. Their houses are being taken over by the Rapid Support Force, and the army is bombing, shelling civilian houses because the Rapid Support Force are in them. So that's what's happening there now. So in Khartoum, there is nobody I personally know left in Khartoum. In Darfur, it's even worse because you either flee, and usually on foot or on your donkey, into Chad. To start with, people were fleeing. Now, or in the recent last at least 3 months, those who've been fleeing have been attacked as they flee. So absolutely horrendous. Our own office has been taken over by the Rapid Support Force. And we were incredibly lucky. Volunteers went in and actually got our computers and have taken our computers away to safety. So it's the building that is now overtaken. We need to see if we can find funds to, I don't know the state it will be in, either to rebuild or find somewhere new or renovate. It's bound to be absolutely trashed in whatever, that would be the easiest, thing. So it's really tough. And of course, I've been spending hours actually trying to reach people, trying to get messages through to them. It's the violence is really stress making. So that's why it's desperate to make certain that Kids for Kids carries on.
Hi, it's Lydia here. A quick interruption. The Changemakers podcast exists to spread the word about the work people are doing right now to make a difference for others. If you're enjoying the conversation, why not tell a friend or two about the podcast and help us reach as many people as possible? Or you could share our content on social media. You can find us on Instagram at the Changemakers Pod. Thank you.
What we try and do from this podcast is raise awareness with people listening and kind of, it would be good to talk about what you think the public's perception is of these issues in Darfur and what people listening could do to help be part of the change that you're trying to make from your point of view.
That sounds very good. One of the things that is really shocking about the current situation is, for example, the United Nations Under-Secretary for Humanitarian Affairs said just a few days ago that what is happening in Darfur is actually the worst humanitarian crisis in the world today. And yet nobody is writing about it. Nobody is being told about it. It is not in the news. The only news that really has more or less happened was when, at the start of the military coup back in April, there were several news pieces about evacuating internationals, and so internationals are not there now. And so if the internationals are not there, there won't be journalists, there will not be reporting. it is not reported. You will pick up things from Al Jazeera a little bit, and The Guardian has written a couple of times. But basically, the worst humanitarian crisis in the world today is not being reported. And that's what's so shocking. And one of the things that I'm finding really difficult is getting news every single day of absolute atrocities. And I find it, some days I literally can't read them. I just can't cope with it, because what I've got to do is keep optimistic, keep knowing that our projects make such a difference. We have to keep going. I'm rather ashamed of our country at the moment. We have reduced our international aid. I find that shocking. And I think for our standing as a country, how can we cut down our help to the poorest people in the world? I just don't understand
and
that.
there's been, like, you know, charities have said it is a death sentence for children, the cuts that the UK government have.
That's absolutely right. I couldn't put it better, Claire. You're absolutely right. And you know what also shocks me is that we give the most aid to countries where we have the most vested interest. You know, there is no vested interest in Darfur, so there is no. It's not a coincidence that the international aid agencies are not there, or they're only in such a tiny way. They're spending a tiny amount. And what we've done is we've launched an emergency appeal. And if you go onto our website, you'll see that we're saying, please donate to the greatest need so that we can respond quickly. And also, I need to build up a fund so that, for example, as soon as it's possible to dig hand pumps, I'll have a water fund. And as soon as it's possible to adopt more villages, my goodness, the queue is I mean, so long. You know, that, yes, that's what I need to do. We also have been asking people to talk to their churches and schools, because it's harvest now. And you know, if people are very generous during harvest often. Please, can every mother, every father who's hears this, every child, talk to your schools, get the schools to adopt, because actually children are wonderful at thinking, well, if I lived in Darfur, I could look after goats, I could, you know, I could help, I could do this. This is what I could do. This is what my life would be like. Yeah, I think I could help children my own age. And children are amazing what they do. I mean, and it's so good for them to realize that actually nobody is too young to make a difference, by the way, or too old to make a difference. You know, that's pretty good.
So you've mentioned, Patricia, that you've always done things for children. And could you tell us a little bit more about that and what it is that kind of motivates you to support children specifically?
I suppose my parents always, my mother in particular, I suppose fathers, you know, worked. My mother in particular was actually chairman of what was very interesting. This was called a moral welfare home. And to start with, when I was small, it was, you know, it was what used to happen was that girls who got themselves pregnant would come to London and would have their babies, and their babies would be adopted, and they would go back. And then as I grew up, luckily, thankfully, things changed. And it became a mother and baby home. And girls would come to London, and mummy's home would look after them. They would have their babies. And then if they couldn't go home with their babies, which is unlikely, you know, it was still completely unacceptable to be a single mother. Mummy's charity would find them a flat, would find them a home, in a house with other single mothers, because they needed support, and help them with jobs and help support them. And I suppose that example was an indelible impression for me. And I mean, I did, well, I don't know if you know, one of the things I did was to start a charity that helped people if they wanted to die at home, and to look after the children, to look after the families. It's a huge burden. It's I don't know if you've ever had anyone seriously ill in your homes, but it takes over the family. And my charity, I started back in the 80s, helped look after the whole family. to keep them as a unit, to help them survive, when somebody wanted to die at home. It was quite a controversial thing to do then. The family unit to me is such an important thing. So it's not just children, it's the family unit.
Family, yeah.
That, to me, is, you cannot talk about a child without talking about both parents. Most charities only talk about mother, empowering the women. I believe it's the fathers as well. It's the whole family, the grandparents too. You need to encompass all.
It's been a thread, hasn't it, throughout your life, which is...
We're trying to help. I've always felt so privileged. Look at us. Look at us and how privileged we are. And, I'm now feeling incredibly humble. I knew that the projects that Kids for Kids does, milk for children, hand pumps and so on, made a difference. During this fighting now, it is making a huge difference. I mean, out of all proportion for what one could imagine, small grassroots projects. Imagine every hospital in Darfur has stopped functioning. There are no hospitals. Now think about that. And think how many women will be pregnant, how many will be giving birth prematurely because of the fear, because of the fighting and so on. In our villages, and in fact, we funded many more than just in our villages, there are midwives. Just that alone, to me, is stunning. We've just had fishing day, actually, and we've raised enough to fund a new midwife. That's stunning.
Congratulations. That is really good.
I mean, and that's just having fun.
Yeah.
We had a terrific day, well, apart from the downpour, but it was absolutely stunning.
What sense do you get of the impact the charity is making?
That little 9-year-old boy, well, this is 23 years later, so you know how old he is. And I actually met him before I was able to go to Darfur when the transitional government was, existing, before this dreadful military coup. And I met him. I hadn't seen him for all that time.
Oh,
and
so
he's
nice.
6'5". I can tell you it's the same person because he has a high forehead and sticky out ears. Don't tell him I said that. And in his village, it was quite extraordinary. There are 1,000 people waiting for us. It was absolutely to say thank you. It shows you the importance of donating a goat, donating a donkey. They wanted to say how transformative, how amazing it was that we were helping their children. They know it's people, it's mothers, it's parents who are donating. It's children. Children here are wonderful. And people said to me, what did you say to Ibrahim? And I said, nothing. And what did he say to you? And I said, nothing. What did you say? We both knew that chance meeting when he was 9 had absolutely changed lives, countless lives. So, it was quite special, quite special.
That's really special.
I mean, another thing we do, for example, is we provide 2 mosquito nets, because malaria is still the biggest killer in Africa, for the children, and also 2 blankets for the children, because they can't afford blankets, they can't afford sheets, anything like that. And it's cold in the winter at night, although it's still hot to my mind in the day in Darfur. It's pretty chilly at night. And the children are malnourished, remember, so they get chest infections very easily. And with the lack of healthcare and so on, and how weak they are, children can die from a simple chest infection. So we provide two blankets for the children. They huddle together, they sleep on the sand, directly on the sand in their straw hut. I mean, think of that. And when I went to a village we tested it as a pilot project to see, was this really worthwhile, providing blankets. And I saw that the blankets were pinned sort of hooked on the outside of the huts. And I said, oh, are you airing the blankets? Oh, no, they said. We're showing, now listen to this. We're showing the village that we have household assets. Because if you own something, think how little they have, if that's valuable. Because then they are listened to in the village meetings, because they have status, because they own 2 blankets. Isn't that humbling? I mean, I find that touching beyond words. I mean, there's so much that I hear that actually brings me to tears, that you think, I mean, imagine we're all mothers. I mean, think what it would be like if you lived there and your child was starving. I mean, it's, absolutely terrible. So it is quite extraordinary what we do.
It's beyond your worst nightmares.
But the numbers don't actually mean anything to me. What I want to do is to adopt more and more villages every year, but I'm also trying desperately hard to get Kids for Kids on a safe footing, so that when I pull up my toes or whatever it is, there will be continuity. And frankly, I actually really would like to work less now. The needs are so huge.
When thinking about the short to kind of medium term future of Darfur, what is your overriding emotion in terms of, I guess, positive change? What would you like to see? What do you feel is possible?
What I'd love to see is the return to democracy. And there are meetings at this moment in Addis Ababa with the Prime Minister, who was ousted by the military, who is meeting with civilian groups and actually trying to work out how to move forward as a democracy. That's what the people of Sudan have been fighting for since 2019. And that's what we pray for. I fear that actually we're in a very bad position in Darfur, because the Hemeti, who is the head of the Rapid Support Force, is made up of the Janjaweed, who are the devils on horseback. He comes, of course, from Darfur. And I fear that he is the one, these are Rapid Support Force, are the ones who are committing genocide now against African tribes in Darfur. And I fear he will retreat to Darfur. And the worst possible outcome that I can see is that Darfur would be segregated from Sudan proper, the whole of Sudan, and would be under his leadership, which he might turn a leaf and start looking after people, but it doesn't look good at the moment. So my fears are about the Rapid Support Force. But one day, maybe the international community will prioritize Sudan. They're not at the moment. They're not taking the action that's needed to stop the fighting. So my hope, of course, is that these talks in Addis Ababa will help towards the peace process. So we all need to pray for peace, please. And in the meantime, we need to look after the children of Darfur. We can do it. We're showing we can do it. So, that's where we'll go. So back to my sleepless nights, I think. A bit more work to do.
Yeah, I mean, how does it impact you personally? Like, obviously, you've just touched on it there, but have you changed since you've done this?
I've got wrinkles. You can see it. The one between my eyebrows. It's the one that's concentration. It's when you run a charity. Oh God, it's not. I sometimes pathetically say, what I wanted to do is provide a few goats. As I struggle through legislation and this, that, GDPR and safeguarding and, all of that. Oh my goodness, it's a stress. But luckily, I'm very lucky. I now have a really lovely deputy called Davina, and Charlotte, who's a fantastic fundraiser. So, but frankly, what I'd love to do is get a CEO to take over, what I do in this country, so I can concentrate on the projects. And that's become rather essential, because with what's happening in Darfur right now, I know that I need to reshape the projects in some ways to make certain that they fit into the new ways of life, and there's going to be other things that they're going to need. So we're trying to get hold of village leaders to find out, the conditions right now, what's going to be essential now.
We noticed that you actually won an award, I believe, last night, a Make a Difference award, and along with your OBE. I wanted to ask what success looks like for you.
What success? The trouble is, the news, the need is so huge. However many children, and I'm so blessed that I know we've changed children. Look at Ibrahim. I know we've changed children's lives, but there are still children out there who need us. So what does success look like? Well, adopting more villages. I need more villages. I can't take in, and frankly, I feel what we've done. That's behind us. You need to always look forward, and there are challenges ahead of us. So what does success look like? Success at the awards ceremony that the BBC Surrey and Sussex did for the Make a Difference Award, that was the success of that was actually that they should notice Darfur, that they should remember the children who are completely ignored, forgotten. They are not important to anyone. There is a little bit of me, Claire, thinking of what does success look like. Well, I suppose my real success would be to ensure the future of Kids for Kids, that it could go on when I'm not around. It could go on helping more and more children. That would be lovely. That would be stunning, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it just? You know, and one child at a time. That's what my motto is. Well, one goat at a time.
Well, you leave an extraordinary legacy already. I think that's very clear. And I can also see how in your shoes it must be very difficult to feel that your work is done. How can it?
No, it can't. I mean, I was astounded to get that award yesterday. I didn't expect it because there were so many wonderful people there doing local things. There were carers looking after, relatives that they've done for 23 years, devoting their lives to them and so on. So it was really special that the BBC should have acknowledged children so far away. I really didn't expect it. And I was shaking so much when I went up. I had to ask the High Sheriff who presented me with the award to help me up on the stage. I thought I was going to fall over,
Well, we've obviously your supper is waiting for you, and we knew that we were going to have too much to ask you, and there is so much more we could talk to you about. But thank you for chatting, coming and talking.
Thank you.
May I say, I'm full of admiration for you two. You've got young children and you're doing something really special. And I think you deserve every success. I'm really full of admiration for you. Don't stop.
We won't.
Thank you so much. That's really kind of you to say.
It's fair to say that we have both learned a lot in this time, just researching and obviously talking to you tonight. So, it's been very eye-opening.
Fantastic.
I love Patricia.
Me too. What a lovely, wonderful, inspiring lady. She is, brilliant.
And the thing is, we totally could spend 2 hours just talking about her life, I feel, and everything she's achieved so far. I loved getting back into what's the thread that's run through her life of family and how that has influenced her and how that's ended up with her working in Darfur and the impact she's making there. I learned a lot as well. What about you?
Absolutely. And I think just the political situation in Darfur, which I have to say I knew very little about beforehand. And it was really eye-opening. And Kids for Kids, I think it just sounds like a brilliant charity, and very much like her baby, her brainchild. She's been there from the onset, and you can really see that in how passionate she is about helping people out there
and empowering them. She helps them to find the answers and allows them to make decisions and shape the charity and the work they're doing. I feel like that's extremely important, not just to come in and say this is what we're going to do. She helps them navigate that and then helps make it a reality. It feels like a partnership rather than another sort of approach.
Really interesting chat, and another great change maker.
Amazing. I hope that I can look back at my career, see so much achievement and success, and although I don't think she reflects on it ever or sees it that way at all.
Yeah, very modest.
Very modest, but Patricia, you have achieved amazing things for so many people, and long may it continue.
Absolutely.
If you enjoyed the episode, please like, rate and subscribe to help us reach more people, or follow us on Instagram @TheChangemakersPod. This has been The Changemakers.